It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in February of 2025 from Atlanta in the Muskogee Creek Territory and former range of the Red Wolf in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And today we're going to be talking about a food-based solution to the climate crisis based on a 2025 article published in the journal Oxford Open Climate Change, titled Solving Climate Change Requires Changing Our Food Systems. I'm one of 20 co-authors on that article, and today I'm talking with the article's lead author, Dr. Svetlana Feigin. Our guest, Dr. Svetlana Feigin, has a PhD in psychology from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And subsequently, she worked as a lecturer and researcher at the School of Population Health and the Auckland University of Technology. Over the past several years, she has served as assistant editor of the medical journal Neuroepidemiology. Her research and publications focus on human empathy and altruism, the personal experiences of activists, social psychology, end-of-life care, ethics, forensic psychology, quantitative research methods, and solutions to climate change. Dr. Feigin is passionate and devoted to the issues of animal and environmental protection. Toward that end, she's the executive director of the All Life Institute, which is a global think tank based in Washington, D.C., that's dedicated to protecting and enhancing all life on this planet, including humans, non-humans, and the Earth, based on the premise that what's good for non-humans and the Earth is virtually always in the best interests of humans, given the profound interdependence of all life. The nonpartisan work of the All Life Institute provides a vital source of policy generation and thought, idea, and research generation, like the climate research we will discuss today. Welcome, Dr. Feigin.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman.
And I know you're coming to us from across the planet in your home country of New Zealand. And I just wanted to tell you and listeners that I was fortunate to visit New Zealand in 2019. And it was just like so gorgeous with its marine life and bird life and friendly people. I was in the Wellington area and in the archipelago at the top of the South Island. And I traveled from Picton over to Abel Tasman National Park. And I know you live in the South Island as well. Was it the natural beauty of New Zealand that sparked your love of animals and nature?
Carrie, it sure was. As you've mentioned, New Zealand is an amazing country with beautiful nature. But for as long as I can remember, I've always had a fascination with nature. So from when I was very young, and I had an innate love for animals, which I think most kids
Yeah.
do naturally. But yeah, I guess from an early age for me, I was very fortunate to be exposed to animal protection and care. Me and my parents actually lived in Rochester, Minnesota, when I was from 6 years onwards, when I was 6 years old. Um, and my father worked at the Mayo Clinic. Yeah, and both of my parents, they fostered in me a view that animals are our kin and that they are worthy and require our protection. And I remember reading a newspaper publication at the time called Kind News, which was something the Humane Society ran, and sharing it with my friends. And it was about animals and animal causes. And also, both of my parents at the time were vegetarian. And so
Nice.
I was exposed to the idea of not eating animals and caring for those in need. So I was very fortunate in that regard. Also, my mom always rescued homeless animals.
Wow.
Yeah, we always had dogs and cats in our home and that we fostered and found homes for. And I also did this in my teenage years, and I still do this to this day. It's just normative behavior for me if you see an animal in need to help it out. And then, yeah, subsequently in 1999, we moved to New Zealand, and I completed my schooling years here and I went to university. And so, yeah, at the University of Auckland during my PhD years, myself and a friend became aware that there was no animal protection organization or like a student group at uni. So we formed one and
Great.
it still exists. Yeah. And then also, I guess through my PhD, which was on human altruistic behavior. Part of my research involved interviewing animal protection activists. And yeah, this exposure for me, it fostered an even deeper concern in the way that we treat non-human animals. And ultimately, it culminated in me working with Professor David Wiebers, who's the founder of the All Life Institute that you mentioned. So yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. And it all
this
starts with that good parenting that you had. So I
it
hope
it
the
does,
parents
but
out
yeah,
there are listening to this. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Fagan, getting to our discussion of the co-authored Oxford Open Climate Change Journal article that you led, what spurred your interest in collecting a variety of scholars to write a statement outlining the connection between plant-based food systems for humans and climate solutions? And I ask that because it's a topic that has been published before in many journals and global reports, noting the many environmental problems with animal source foods. So why did you think it needed to be clarified now and for whom?
Yeah, sure, that's right. Just to give you a little bit of background with regards to the scholars and our co-authors that co-authored this paper. They are all thought leaders and world scientists with multidisciplinary backgrounds in human, animal, and environmental fields. Many of them are affiliated with the All Life Institute. And these scholars, they're dedicated to improving the state of the world for all life on the planet. And the areas of expertise are very wide ranging. So, climate science, journalism, neuroscience, global health, law, many others. And I think it is precisely the diverse backgrounds of
Mm.
these world leading researchers which is needed in order to remove the silos that people work in and essentially create a bridge between academic, government, corporate fields, but also the general public. And so, with this article, we wanted to draw attention to the urgent need for action on climate change and highlight that without changes to our food systems, we will not succeed on preventing further climate change and the irreversible consequences that will come with it. So, as you mentioned, many reports have previously highlighted the problems with animal sourced foods and the impact that they are having on the environment. But very few have called for a global phase out of industrialized animal agriculture and a global shift to a predominantly plant based diet as solutions which need to be addressed in government, corporate spheres, both globally and domestically. And so we wanted to highlight that what is good for non humans and the earth is virtually always in the best interest of us humans due to the interconnectedness of all life. And all of the authors of this article are concerned with protecting Earth's life forms because essentially we believe that what we do now, what we're able to do now and in the future, crucially depends on abundant plant and animal life, as well as clean water and air.
I like that. I think it was well worth all the effort you put in wrangling us 20 or so authors and getting us all
Yeah,
to weigh in on this and then dealing with the reviewers at the journal. Like, I just want our
sure.
listeners to know this isn't just like an op-ed where she wrote something and then the rest of us just kind of signed our names on it, even though she did the bulk of the work of getting all the literature in there and doing the writing, but
Mm,
then it was like co-authored with all these people. So I probably wouldn't have taken on such a big task. So I definitely appreciate you doing that. And you
thank you.
mentioned that it's very solutions oriented, and I think you've already told us really what the central argument or proposal is. But just can you summarize for us again, like what's the central argument or proposal that we as authors are making in this short climate article?
Sure, Carrie. Yeah, I can do that. So the central argument that we are making in a nutshell is our exploitation of the Earth's resources and inhabitants has created a climate change emergency, presenting an existential threat to humans, but also other life forms. And this requires urgent action. So we have a timeline of the next 7 to 8 years. And
Mhm.
if we do not change the trajectory that we are on, the coming decades will bring with them some pretty devastating consequences, such as widespread environmental and agricultural destruction, extensive famine, flooding, disease, and warfare with hundreds of thousands of climate refugees. So, to solve and effectively mitigate human induced climate change, we propose in the article the following two actions. So, firstly, the ending and global phase out of industrialized animal ag, which is, in other words, it's referred to as factory farming as well in our article. And this is the most prolific and damaging form of animal farming globally. And then, secondly, we propose the adoption of a mainly plant based diet. And taken together, uh, everything that we have done thus far has led us to a climate change emergency. And it's also created other existential threats, which are, by the way, intertwined with climate change, such as global pandemics that have
Yes.
occurred both in the past, yeah, and present, antibiotic resistant infections, and a global human health crisis. So we argue that humanity will not succeed if we continue on a business as usual basis. And I think this is a very important point. Our collective future depends on the decisions that we are making now. And this involves changing our food systems directly by phasing out factory farming and adopting a predominantly plant-based diet. And we urgently also need a global mindset shift from thinking in terms of human centric needs and behavior to an all life centric, or more commonly referred to as an ecocentric perspective, to guide our decisions and actions now, but also in the future.
Yeah, I like that. And listeners of In Tune to Nature over the last 15 years frequently hear me and experts discussing the multitude of environmental and ethical problems with breeding and mass killing fellow animals for food and capturing and killing them in mass from the sea, especially considering our human population continues to grow exponentially. But for new listeners, Dr. Fagan, can you share with us some of the compelling statistics about how the current and growing global demand for animal source meat and dairy is unsustainable and plant-based food sources are a logical solution? Like you could just pull a few sentences from the actual journal article that you thought were kind of compelling.
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. So I do want to give a little bit of background. I mean, these statistics that I'm about to mention are available everywhere. I mean, these are well known. But in terms of just our consumption for animals and animal products, I mean, this isn't in the article specifically, but 80 billion land animals are killed for our consumption globally, and over 1 trillion sea animals worldwide. In the United States alone, 99% of land animals are factory farmed. And worldwide, this is growing. This percentage worldwide is 70%.
Mm.
And then jumping to our article, animal ag is a major contributor to climate change and the climate change crisis. It emits more greenhouse gases than all modes of transportation combined. Currently, 83% of the world's farmland is occupied by animal agriculture, but it only gives us 18% of calories and 37% of protein. And most of the soy and cereals that we grow are fed to animals, not humans. And the current demand for meat, dairy, and other animal products has contributed up to a third of global greenhouse gas emissions to date. Now, there have been previous, more conservative estimates of the animal ag contribution, but these did not take into account the industrial and farm processes, the packaging, waste, fuel transport, retail consumption, and of course, the historical and present land use changes that have occurred. The FAO some years ago has projected that demand for meat will double by 2050. And if we stay on the present course of animal product consumption. That means that 80% or roughly 80% of existing forests and shrubland will have to be converted to support raising animals for food. And this conversion is hugely unsustainable. It means that an additional 35 million kilometers squared of land will be required. And this is roughly the combined area of Australia and Africa. So
Wow.
these factors, yeah, it's pretty staggering statistics. These factors, they mean that reducing our demand for animal products is unavoidable. And so while we are heavily reliant, and there are some very promising solutions technology-wise and other means, and they are absolutely necessary, we can actually make the change now and rely less on animal products and consume more plant-based products. Also, meat consumption alone, that's just meat consumption, contributes 4 times as much to global greenhouse gas emissions as a plant-based diet. So
Wow.
if we were to adopt a plant-based diet on a global scale, we would reduce the demand for land by up to 76%.
Wow.
In the United States alone, emissions would drop by up to 73%, and freshwater withdrawals globally will be reduced by 19%. So yeah, overall, replacing animal source foods with plant-based foods would make a huge contribution to preserving our planet, and also will reduce environmental impact of animal ag by over 80%. So logically, the switch to a predominantly plant-based diet seems to be a solution that we can do right now. And it's for our health, for ourselves, animals, and the planet.
Yeah,
And
it's
there are,
something we
as, yeah,
obviously need to do.
yeah,
Like when you hear all those statistics, we realize it's not just something vegans and animal rights activists would like, even though that's true, we would
sure.
like it. But it's things
Yeah,
we just are gonna have to do if since we only have the one planet.
of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Let me reintroduce you. If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman talking about an article published in the January 2025 issue of the journal Oxford Open Climate Change titled Solving Climate Change Requires Changing Our Food Systems. I'm one of the 20 co-authors on the article, and I'm talking today with the article's lead author, Dr. Svetlana Feigin from New Zealand, who's the executive director of the All Life Institute. In case any listeners want to read or reference the article, I'll link to the open access article on the Facebook page for In Tune to Nature and in the podcast notes for this episode. In terms of how we co-authors propose that society be encouraged to make a big dietary shift toward plant-based diets rather than animal-based diets, the article says, quote, we suggest that such transformations in global food systems can be accomplished largely through education and large-scale public information campaigns, removal of subsidies, taxation to account for externalized costs of animal agriculture, improved labeling of products, and various investment and divestment drivers, unquote. Dr. Fagan, can you tell us about the feasibility of some of these pathways to dietary change? I know it has to be brief, but maybe starting with some of the economic ideas like about removing subsidies or changing subsidies and like different taxation or investments.
Yeah, sure. So it's a little bit tricky to speak about this country to country specific,
Yeah,
but
it varies,
yeah,
right, each nation.
it does absolutely. So it is quite hard to ascertain this from country to country. But I guess on a general level, with regard to subsidies and taxations, so the externalized costs of animal ag actually produces the illusion that animal-based products cost less,
Hmm.
especially those that are produced on factory farms. And the externalized costs of these products are passed on to others outside the industry, such as in the form of government subsidies to rural communities, and also the negative health and environmental impacts that they have. So the true cost of animal product consumption is absorbed by taxpayers, governments, and future generations and the planet. So what this means is that the products produced by animal factory farms are actually artificially cheap.
Right.
And if policies were introduced which required factory farms to pay for the damage they cause in the form of taxation and removal of subsidies, then the prices of these products would dramatically change and make them much less attractive to the consumer.
Mhm.
And there are other actions that can also be taken by governments that include things like more stringent animal welfare standards, legislative limitations on where factory farms can exist, and also mass media and public information campaigns. So
Yeah, those are
another
great
point, I
ideas.
guess, yeah, I would like to make is that for governments that are trying to limit spending, a strong case can be made about not only the cost of the subsidies themselves up front, but also the enormous cost of chronic disease, infectious disease, and disability in humans that comes on the back of the equation. And what we propose in our article is that plant-based alternatives can be made cheaper through tax cuts and funded health campaigns that are aimed at reducing animal product intake. Also, the taxes that are collected from animal products could be used to further develop technological innovations to alternative meat, milk products, and also aid farmers in their transition, which I think is an important point.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I guess essentially the goal is for alternative plant-based products to become competitive with the animal ag industry. And this is where investment can come in. Um, Increasingly, individual and institutional investors are becoming more sensitive to how businesses affect climate change. So, if investors were to receive accurate data on this front, there will be a natural shift away from entities or investing in entities such as those engaged in industrialized animal farming that have a negative impact on the planet.
Yeah, those are really compelling ideas. And with just the minute or two we have left, I was just interested too, since you have a background in psychology, do you have any insights into the ways we can best create the shift in public mindsets, in terms of fostering the political will necessary to make big changes to food policies and systems? I mean, some of what you said is like if the price goes up, we're not going to want to buy as much animal
Yep.
products, and that maybe the price for plant-based proteins and fruits and vegetables would be more affordable. So, like certain things would
Mhm.
shift naturally. But I didn't know if you had thought of other ways, like psychologically, we could make it appealing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be brief on this one. The existing research already shows that the general public are against many of the cruel and inhumane practices that are used on factory farms. And they're also against the effects that industrialized animal ag has on human health, the health of communities, and the environment. So, from a psychology perspective, there are a number of ways that a shift in public mindset could be achieved. Some of these are, for example, an increased emphasis on health benefits of a predominantly plant-based diet, so raising awareness, the media visibility of plant-based alternatives to animal products,
Yeah.
which includes things like, in commercials and public health media messaging that's designed to drive more healthful behavior, providing consumers with viable meat and dairy replacement options in institutional settings. So,
Yeah.
for example, university cafeterias, which is already being done in many universities worldwide, and in hospitals, crucially.
Yes.
Yeah, increasing efficacy beliefs by linking food and climate, but also food and health, which will give consumers more power over their well-being. And I guess finally, more public information campaigns that place emphasis on factory farming critiques.
Yeah, and there's plenty to critique there. Dr.
There is, yeah.
Fein, to wrap up, if any of our listeners are compelled to be part of the food solution to the climate crisis, what can they do as consumers or maybe as citizens and community members? and it might be using the article that that we published or just in
Mm,
general.
sure. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Well, I'll go from the article a little bit. We cannot deny that the course we are on is not sustainable, and we cannot continue how we are doing now. So, I guess the single best and most effective thing that individuals can do for our planet and all its inhabitants right now is to adopt a plant-based diet or a predominantly plant-based diet. And we also need to become mindful of our consumption habits. And this can be achieved through self-educating. There are a number of great documentaries, books, podcasts such as your own that people can turn to educate themselves. And we need to rethink our relationship with all life on Earth and the many impacts we have on Earth itself for the benefit of us and for future generations. And I'd just like to end with a quote from our article. Um, the future of humanity and all life on our planet depends on sustainability. And the data indicate that we will not succeed on the issue of climate change unless we change the way that we produce and consume food. End of quote. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Dr. Freeman.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I
Really
want to
appreciate it. Yep.
thank you for taking the time and effort to put together this article and to work to get it published. And I was thinking that our listeners could also be part of circulating the article if they're interested, because this climate journal article we've been talking about is open access. So it's not behind a paywall, basically. So people can share
Absolutely.
it
Yep.
with their employers, religious leaders,
Yep.
institutions, city councils, senators, because it really is designed more at like a policy level, not just at a personal level. So I'm going to put a
Of
link to the
course.
article in the podcast notes for this episode.
Thank you so much. And I want to mention as well, the article is actually on the list of most read articles now for Oxford Open Climate Change Journal, which is
That's
an awesome
exciting.
compliment to us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
excited about that.
So thank you for your contribution on the paper as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks for including me. Well, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Dr. Svetlana Feigin, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for coordinating this climate change article that reinforces the ecological, scientific, and ethical evidence and pathways toward feeding the human population on a largely plant-based diet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/In Tune to Nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species. All the other species struggling to survive on a warming planet with over 8 billion hungry humans. Thank you for listening. Cheers.